Hello, and welcome to another episode of Anything But Ordinary with Spooky and Raven. Tonight we are going to talk about unsolved disappearances, Glenn Miller, Theodosia Burr Alston, and more, maybe. I am Spooky, and here is your most awesome host, Raven.
I like that. Maybe. Depends on how much we get in or what.
Depends on how long these two subjects take.
I know, it's kind of funny. So how are you tonight?
I'm doing good, considering it rained all day and the weather is just crappy.
Oh. Well, that's not good. Hopefully it gets better for you then.
I hope it does. And the temperature's down into the 40s. I have a feeling that fall is over with and we're headed right straight into winter.
Yeah, I heard there's supposed to snow soon.
So we talked about unsolved disappearances is going to be a regular program. And it's really kind of hard to figure out what we're going to talk about on this particular subject. And the two people, one of the people that we chose, I will get this out in a minute, I'm getting tongue-tied, is Glenn Miller.
Yeah, Glenn Miller. He was like a famous band.
He was very famous at the time he disappeared. So, you want to tell us about him?
Oh yeah, I was just reading, somebody was saying that the mic was a little loud, so I was going to turn it down here for a second. So, just give me one moment. I don't know why all of a sudden everything went up on us, but it happens.
Yep, it does.
We have unprofessional equipment, so.
Yes, we do.
It works, so. Alright, well, Glenn Miller was born in Iowa on March 1st of 1904, and he started out playing the mandolin as a child that his father bought him. But quickly he switched over to the horn as a young man when he traded in his mandolin that his dad got him, because I guess he wanted to play the horn more than the mandolin. His family moved around a bit in his younger years and finally settling in Colorado in 1918, and in high school Glenn joined the school band. Soon after graduating in 1921, Glenn turned professional, becoming a member of the Boyd Senate Orchestra, and by 1923 Miller quit the orchestra to go to college. He spent about a year in the University of Colorado, but soon quickly returned to his first love, music. Traveling a bit, Glenn ended up in Los Angeles working with the Ben Polka's band, briefly before he traveled to New York, where he freelanced as a trombonist and worked with the Dorsey brothers. Soon after, Glenn formed his own orchestra, and after kind of reconfiguring, the people, firing some people and getting other people in, he found like his niche and the right sound that he really liked. And that's when he first scored his first hit was called Wishing. I don't know if you know that or heard of it at all. Spooky. They're saying that you're quiet, so I don't know. Can you turn up your mic volume on your Skype, Spooky? Okay. Let's see where I was saying. Sorry about that. That same year, he penned his even bigger successful single called Moonlight Serenade, which climbed to the charts in 1939. With their distinctive swing jazz style, Miller and his orchestra became the country's top dance band. And after that, he went on to do a couple films and stuff, him and his band did. And now in 1942, at the peak of his career, Miller decided to join the war effort at the age of 38. Miller was too old to be drafted and first volunteered for the Navy, but was told that they did not need his services. So Glenn wrote to the Army Brigadier General Charles Young and persuaded the United States Army to accept him so he could, in his own words, be placed in charge of a motorized Army band. Now, after being accepted into the Army, Miller's patriotic intention of entertaining the Allied forces with the dance rhythms of his music and whatnot, it earned him the rank of captain, and he was soon promoted to major by August of 1944. Miller was transferred to the Army Air Force, where he served initially as Assistant Special Service Officer for the Army Air Force Southeast Training Center at the Maxwell Field in Alabama in December of 1942, and he played like the trombone with the rhythm mirrors, which was basically like a 15-piece dance band at that time, and they kind of just, did service clubs and recreation halls and stuff for the army and the people over here at the time. And then afterwards he formed like even a larger marching band that was to be, the core of the network of the service orchestra. And after he did a broadcast called I Sustain the Wings, it's kind of like when him and his 50-piece Army Air Force band then went over into England that summer of 1944, where he gave about 800 performances. Okay, Spooky, I know for a second, we're gonna have to like restart the broadcast or something, or I have to check something because they said they're not hearing you at all of a sudden. Like your audio didn't even pick up or not go on, so I don't know what happened all of a sudden, but let me just check something right here. But, just a second, guys, I'm gonna see why she's not coming in. It was working before, so. Alright, why don't you try talking now, Spooky?
Okay, can anybody hear me at all? Scooby says, that's okay, I'm enjoying Ravy.
Oh, woohoo. Sorry, I don't know why all of a sudden we're having, like, weird issues out of nowhere.
I know, it worked just a little bit ago.
Right. Dang.
And now, all of a sudden, on the broadcast, there she is. Okay, like I was saying...
he was famous.
He was famous. I mean, he was absolutely famous. This is not just a guy that went into the military and then...
poor, yeah. He was a big-known person.
He was a very big-known big band leader.
Right.
And it's like I said before, he left a civilian life that paid him $15,000 to $20,000 a week.
Right. And that's a lot of money for back then.
That is a lot of money back then. What, back in the 30s? That is, almost like hundreds of thousands now. And Penny says this is a show about mysterious disappearances after all.
Yeah, that might be why our sounds are going out, Yeah. Spooky disappeared, but we found her back again.
And I mean, even in like 1942, RCA presented him with his first gold record. So, and you have to sell 1 million records to get a gold record. So, this is not just a flash in the pan guy.
Oh no, he was huge, like how the Beatles were, and what have you.
And he played with a lot of famous people, and one of the things that he did was he played in a lot of bands before he struck out on his own, that Bing Crosby, who was the absolute recording star of that era.
Right. Well, he had a huge career, and he basically got the swing and jazz style really going.
Yeah.
And he had a huge following, and he was a very patriotic man who loved his country. And at the age of 38, he was leaving behind his wife and 2 adoptive children to join the service because he really wanted to do a service, and he wanted to bring his music over to bring up the morale of all the men who were fighting during the World War II.
Yeah, and that was like his way of joining the war effort.
Right.
Was to get, because special services, not to be confused with special forces, but special services were the different parts of the military, the entertainment and stuff like that. These were the people, even though they may have gone into combat zones, they actually didn't do any fighting. They were there to help the troops any way they could through entertainment and things like that.
Right. Well, when he went over in the summer of 1944, they basically, cause by then he was already a major, so Major Glenn Miller, at that time, they started having him, while he was in England, he was recording like a series of records at the EMI, which was owned by the Abbey Road Studios. And basically the recordings of the AAF band made in 1994 at Abbey Road were like propaganda broadcasts for the Office of War Information. Now, basically all the songs, or many, if not almost all of them, were sung in German. And then Glenn Miller also spoke in German about the war effort in it. So before Miller's disappearance, his music was used by, the World War II AFN radio broadcasting for, entertainment and, like we said before, to bring up their morale, as well as a counter propaganda.
Right, and for those of you that don't know, AFN stands for Armed Forces Network.
Yes. I should have said that, but I didn't, but that's why you're here. But, Miller was basically, fulfilling the request by the Office of the War Information to, broadcast the orchestra's performance under his direction to the German military and also the German prisoners of war. And the propaganda broadcasts were basically intended to show Germans that the Allies wanted an inclusion of all the countries and the quest for peace, and that American music and life among the Allies was like lively and upbeat, positive, and lovely. You know what I mean?
Right.
No, I said lovely, but that's like the words they used back then.
Lovely.
Well, yeah.
That's a good, strong military word. Lovely.
But they did. It was in the stuff I was reading, but that's basically what they wanted to do, and they wanted to, bring people over to understand that, hey, we're here to help, and all of us are coming together, and they wanted the Germans to know that you're running out of time, because we're coming.
Right.
But Miller headed up the U.S. Army Air Force Band, which gave numerous performances that entertained like more than 250,000 troops during the war. And when he was stationed in England in 1944, in December, he was trying to make preparations to fly to Paris to make final arrangements to bring his musicians, now all of a sudden I can't talk, in for a Christmas concert for the Allied troops who helped liberate France. Because during the winter of 1944, the Allies were, continuously pushing towards Rhine and the heartland.
World War II ended in 1944, so it's so he's basically in after the war, in at the end of the war.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just saying this Christmas part of what they were trying to do and why he was so bent to hurry up and get here is because during they were Hitler's Nazi Empire, the Normandy landing, happened in June 6th of that year.
Right.
And it basically paved a way for liberating much of France and the capital, which was Paris. So made the air coordinates between Britain and France had become, basically secured to allow flights to and from that part of the mainland of Europe to journey without any fighter escorts. So I'm trying to explain why they didn't have any fighter escorts. So this is the night, he was the night before on December 14th when he's, trying to, because for days and days he was trying to get a flight over to Paris to prepare everything, to make sure the concert hall was all set up. They had all this things there properly to get all his bandmates over and what have you. And the original plan was for his manager, Don Haynes, to fly with Miller to Paris. However, with, like I said, the many failed attempts due to the bad weather, Miller's plans were changed. And it was said that one night Miller met Lieutenant Colonel Norman Basil at an officer's mess east of and near Northampton on the 14th of December, and he had struck up a conversation with him. Well, he had mentioned that he would be departing for Paris the next day from the RAF airfield at Twin Woods Farm, and hearing about Glenn Miller's plans, he offered him a seat on his plane, and, Glenn Miller accepted. Now, everybody kind of knows, if you're reading about Glenn Miller and stuff, he actually had a fear of flying. He, was petrified of flying, so for him to agree to go on this really small plane, because he was going to go on he was supposed to ride on a huger plane, like one of the bombers or whatever, so he was going to hop on one of these smaller planes, which I have a photo here. It's this one here. So on December 15th it was like a bitterly cold morning, and Bedford was like covered with like this thick heavy fog, so it was just not good weather. And Haynes, Miller's manager, was kind of concerned, so he called up Ezelot to find out if the flight was still on, and he assured Haynes that by the time they took off after lunch, the fog would be gone, so the weather was supposed to be better. Well, Bassett contacted the pilot John Morgan, who confirmed that he would be arriving soon. So Glenn Miller and, Don Haynes showed up, and while they, were waiting in the car with, they were just waiting in the car, Morgan,
Right.
he kind of, made a joke saying, that Morgan wasn't going to be able to find the airfield because it was so cold and it was like 24 degrees Fahrenheit, and
Right.
that it was just so foggy that even the birds were grounded. Well, minutes later, the aircraft appeared through the dense fog and landed on the airstrip. Now, the three men left the control tower area, and then they drove over towards the Norseman C-64, which is not the plane that they were in, because that plane's completely gone, but this is a Norseman C-64, so this is exactly identical plane of what they rode in that day. So they basically drove over to that plane, and the three they met up with Morgan, and he apologized for being late, and they said that this is what kind of Miller said to those guys, and Don Haynes, mentioned that he had mentioned this it said in the last minutes he kind of doubted flying into the fog in a single engine plane, and when he muttered, where the hell are the parachutes? In a twist of irony, Bassett replied, "What's the matter with you, Miller? Do you want to live forever?" And that's when they climbed in.
I would have said yes.
Well, that's when they climbed into their C-64 and started to head down the tarmac for Paris, and Miller made no more further comment, and Don Haynes just watched as the Norsemen sped down the runway and took to flight, and he was the last person to see them all alive. So
I can understand his apprehension. I mean, that's a small plane. And to be flying in bad weather, and it just seems to me that it's bad judgment to fly in that kind of weather.
Oh, yeah, it was like, it's wintry, it's got cold, rainy coming down.
I know, this
they
is
had
December,
thick fog.
it's...
Mm-hmm.
You might as well say December, you're smack dab in the middle of winter, although
Well, they said
some people are going to argue that, but...
They said it was 24 degrees Fahrenheit. It was really thick and dense fog. And these engines, or these Norseman C-64s, weren't built for that kind of weather.
Well...
Because the parts can ice up and freeze up.
But the parts can ice up on any plane. I don't care how big or how small it is, but it just seems to me, though, that if he was having second thoughts, he should have listened to them, because I don't think I could have got in that small plane in that kind of weather. At least in a big plane, if it's going to go down, you can run to the back and hope you're one of the last people that hit.
Well, the guy mentioned to him jokingly, saying, Charles Lindbergh had made it across the whole Atlantic on one engine, so
Yeah.
they're just going across the channel, so he's just like, come on. And I think what really kind of pushed Glenn Miller is because if he kept waiting, his band finally got over there before he did, and he was trying to meet up with them, and he wanted to make sure and have everything preparated right for this one big, huge Christmas concert to, thank, kind of like a thank you to all the guys that, stormed Normandy,
Right. And this was probably, it was probably would have been one of his last concerts over there for,
One of the big, huge ones, anyway. But according to the U.S. military, supposedly, this is what I read, okay, I don't know 100%, but, I did a lot of research, I was reading as much as I could. It said, according to the U.S. military announcement, less than 24 hours later, Captain Miller's flight never arrived, and he was presumed lost over the English Channel. Now, news of his death sent shockwaves around the world, and it was particularly felt back home in the United States, where he left his wife Helen, 42, and their 2 young adoptive children behind. Now, what happened to Miller's plane remains a mystery, and neither the plane nor Miller's body or the other 2 men were ever recovered. Now, what had exactly happened to the Norsemen has been the subject of, tons of speculation and theories over all the, since it happened,
Right.
And these theories basically ranged from...
Actually, it's one that is still talked about to this day because, like Raven said, his body was never recovered.
Nothing was recovered.
No, nothing was. And it's kind of odd, too, because the English Channel really isn't that wide.
Right. Well, they have so many
deep.
theories, that some of them are kind of plausible and other ones are just insanely ridiculous, from a bunch of them that, if you look up, you read, or you heard about, because, like one of them, here's like one, they said the German-speaking Miller was working for the U.S. Army Psychological Warfare Division, which he was because he was recording the German language propaganda broadcasts and musical performances. And then they're saying, was his disappearance linked to the propaganda mission? Like, was Glenn Miller more than just like a band leader in the military? It was said that Bedford, where he was at, was used as a lot for covert operations. A bunch of code breakers were there, and propaganda broadcasts and stuff where the place was where he was staying in. And they said that Glenn Miller and actor David Niv did work together, and they were kind of saying, did Glenn Miller do a secret propaganda mission headed by the film star David Niv? Because he did a lot of secret message, covert operations. The actor did a little bit. So they're trying to, people are saying maybe Glenn Miller may have got in with him and did something,
Well, there were other stars, too, that actually were spies. Greta Garbo was one. She was a big actress of her day. Which is basically in the same era. But David Niven, I never heard anything about David Niven.
He's the one who actually helped Glenn Miller and his bandmates, I guess if you want to call them all, to get over to Bedford and out of the area of where they were staying. And then the area that they had just got out of, I think they said the day before, or the day after they had left, the building that they were staying in got bombed. So he kind of saved their lives, in a way. But during that time, there was the swing kids in Germany and all over Europe that really took a big liking to this Glenn Miller's music and others, and the music that was playing.
Well,
and
his music was still playing in the United States. Just because he was in the military doesn't mean that his fans forgot about him. He was still, his records were still number one bestsellers.
Oh yeah, they were playing it over there as well as over in Europe, but it was all over Europe too, not just in Germany. But the German kids really took a liking to it, and then that's why there became like the swing movement, and the Nazis hated it, because it basically, what they were doing, as the swing kids were doing, they were, protesting the movement against the Nazi regime, and, they were rejecting the Nazi state and the ideology, and the further, Hitler's.
And another reason why they liked him so much is because he was the first big band leader to compose music and select music that people could actually dance to.
Well, yeah, they liked that, but it wasn't that. But they also liked the fact of what it was promoting, and it was going against everything that which Hitler was pushing for, and the Nazi regime was all about uniforming and militarizing, and they were basically taking out the people's community. Well, the swing kids, rejected against it, and it was like their form of their own personal freedom, and they were, and that's what jazz and swing, for them and others, thought, it stood for love, life, self-determination, non-conformance, freedom, independence, liberalism, and all that stuff. And that's what Glenn Miller's band played, and that's what the propaganda of what they were saying, and that's what he was kind of pushing about. Well, and that's when the Gestapo and the police and other governmental organizations got angry because they were against the Americans, ideology and everything else. So they started scooping up the swing girls and swing boys, and they were putting them in, concentration camps and everything else. So that's why one of these theories of what they're saying is because of the effect that Glenn Miller and his music had on the younger generation that the Nazis in the fur wanted to put a stop to the propaganda broadcasts and the musical performances, that people were stating that maybe he was captured and, you know, taken care of by that because he had dealings with, you know, the psychological warfare division as far as putting out that propaganda music and stuff. I don't believe that, though. I don't think he was a spy that worked with
I don't really think he was either, but I could see why that particular theory would come up because he was fluent in German.
Somewhat. He wasn't as good as some people were saying, because I listened to some of it, and he even admitted that he wasn't as great, but he did know his German or whatever. But he did work for that, and then he did work with a couple of people who were known to have done some type of covert message spy stuff, you know, and he was in the heart of Bedford where they did have tons of code breakers and all that other stuff, so I can kind of see where people might think, okay, maybe he had a hand in this. And also the fact that the whole swing movement was like a huge rebellious thing against, you know, Hitler and the Nazis and all that stuff. So I can see where people would want to romanticize that and maybe say, hey, this could have happened. But I personally don't think that he had anything to do with any secret covert operations. I think that
there wasn't anything in his biography. There wasn't anything indicating that he did. It just that he went and entertain the troops. That was his job in the military, was to entertain troops.
And that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to bring morale to everybody and to bring some type of happiness while they were going through all this hell. But I mean, for like a whole year, Helen Miller wrote to the Army Air Forces saying she heard that Glenn was in an Army war camp being held as a prisoner, but they told her that he never arrived to his destination, that he just simply vanished. So, I mean, because of these rumors that were going around, even back a little bit back then, after, you know, even just during the year, she even heard wind of maybe he was captured because he was doing some type of covert operation. So she kept writing to them, and they're like, no, he didn't.
During World War II, a lot of rumors and a lot of conspiracy theories and stuff went around, and so it only makes sense that she would have heard about it, you know, that it got back to her.
Well, they have no proof of anything. He just disappeared. He vanished. So, of course, she wants to find out what happened to him, where he went. And, okay, this is another theory that's out there, which I don't believe either. I think it's hogwash. But the second theory they're kind of saying is, like, Miller had survived, but later died in a bordello. And that, you know, Glenn Miller and the two officers basically safely crossed the channel to Paris and had later died in somewhat of a compromising condition because he had a heart attack, and they had found him with a, you know...
I don't believe that one either.
Yeah, me either. But they're basically saying that he had died there, and then they quickly escorted him out and, you know, got rid of his body somewhere. But I'm just like, whatever. I don't believe that. And that was something somebody was pushing in the tabloids and stuff. I think I can't remember what his name was, but he supposedly claims that he demanded the American government under the Freedom of Information Act to give up this information, and that's where he discovered this steamy cover-up that Miller had actually arrived safely in Paris on the 14th of December, but ended up having a heart attack in the bordello.
That's kind of strange, though, if you stop and think about it, okay? He didn't leave England or wherever it was he was at until the 15th of December. So how could he leave on the 15th but die in Paris on the 14th?
Well, they're saying that he actually left beforehand, you know, and that he didn't really leave on the 15th. That there's people saying that they found this information, you know, because of the Freedom of Information Act, and that they found this documentation saying that him and the other guys had actually left on the 14th, and that he had died in a bordello. But nobody knows where his body is either. So whatever. Yeah, but that's a BS theory.
Oh, what was his name? Don Hayes, though, stood there and watched him leave on the 15th.
Right, his manager.
Yeah, his manager.
And his manager couldn't get on the plane because it was too small, and there was already 3 men on there. Because the pilot, of course, he had to fly the plane. And then the other guy had to get over because he had to go help see over some type of Air Force landing strip stuff and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Glenn Miller had to get over because he had to meet up with the rest of his band and make sure that everything was set up before the huge Christmas, whatever, orchestra-type performance happens, you know. So I'm agreeing with you on this one, the theory about how he died in a bordello and there's this secret cover-up paperwork that was found, you know.
I want to tell you, I'll tell you what, if he died in a bordello, that would have been flashed across the country.
Right.
Somebody as famous as him, if he had died in a bordello, that would not have been just a secret government document. That would have been flashed over television, over in the newspapers.
Well, not just the United States. It would have been in the French
the
papers
world.
and German.
Around the world, because
stuff.
he was known in a lot of countries. You know, he was famous in a lot of places, not just the United States. He was famous in Europe also. So to me, that theory is just unbelievable, because that would not have been classified as top secret. That would have been flashed all over the world that man died in a bordello.
Right. That's why.
Not to mention, the so-called French prostitute would have been famous.
Right. And then but that would have made everybody else a liar, you know, who stated that they had left on the 15th. You know what I mean? And the men who were there on the ground, the pilot and the manager and, you know, what have you. But also, then you'd have this huge cover-up about all the people who came to get rid of the body, and eventually somebody would have talked. Where did the body go? You know?
Right.
So.
Right. His body would have been discovered. Not discovered, discovered, but
But then they also were trying to say that then, you know, these people, you know, called the Germans, and the Germans came and stole his body, and da-da-da-da. It's just the stupidest one I ever heard. That was one of the dumbest theories I ever heard, and it's just...
It is a dumb theory.
It's totally dumb theory. Another theory they had mentioned...
And also, before you get on the next theory, I can't believe that particular theory was acquired through the Freedom of Information Act.
I know.
Like the United States government don't have enough to cover up.
They hardly, you know what? They hardly debriefed the men on tons of the flights and everything else, because there was so much going on all the time, and so many planes being bombed and everything else. If it wasn't a mission, they didn't debrief the men, you know? So there are a lot of things where people try to get, you know, documented, and then they just got shushed away because there was more important things to do and everything else. So you think they're really going to write up during the whole World War II that, you know, Glenn Miller was in the bordello and died of a heart attack, and, you know, they secretly whisked him away, and, you know...
I know that just, like I said, that just doesn't make sense. And even if they debriefed the men, one of them was going to talk. I don't care what. You cannot keep a secret. The only way that you can keep a secret is if you are the only person that knows it.
Or you're dead.
Or you're dead. But that is such a stupid theory to me, because there is no way that could have been kept a secret. And it's like I said before, it's not as if the government don't have enough to cover up, that they got to cover up the fact that Glenn Miller died in the arms of a prostitute, French prostitute.
That's not something I think they'd really care about really covering up, because it has nothing to do with army secrets or military.
Right. Well, that would be the only thing, you know, is the fact that he was in the military. But when you stop and think about back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, all of these scandalous things that movie stars and musicians did that weren't covered up, Glenn Miller all of a sudden is covered up.
Yeah, I know. Oh, I know. Well, that's why I said there are some that are kind of plausible, and other ones are just downright ridiculous and outrageous. And the family's always hearing these different theories, and people going out of their way and centralizing this and saying, I found this, I found that. It probably drove them nuts. But, of course, they're going to trace down every one that's out there to figure it out. Now, the third one that they're kind of talking about is they said that Glenn Miller had died of medical conditions in a hospital. Now, there's 2 different claims made that Miller had in fact gone over the channel and back, but later died in an American hospital. Now, one of the claims was put forth by New Jersey Department of Health, which stated that Miller had died in Ohio in 1945 as a result of injuries. Now, there's this guy who had, like, this, I think his name was Dr. Chris Valentine or whatever. He was, like, huge for... Valenti? Yeah, whatever. Good enough. Thank you. For, you know, Glenn Miller conspiracy theories, you know, and he was always just pumping them out there and whatever, and he asked people if they knew anything to send him information, and he supposedly received, like, this anonymous letter from an unnamed doctor. I like that, unnamed. Da-da-da-da.
I always like that, because those are the most reliable sources, or the unnamed sources. I mean, who could think that they would lie? Sorry.
But they basically, this unknown doctor...
I know, I believe it.
Claimed that Miller had been flown in with a gunshot wounds in 1945. Now, this is the weird thing. Why would he fly from Europe all the way into America to help him with gunshot wounds? That's stupid. But later died under his care. Now, another theory was that he had had cancer because everybody knew that Glenn Miller was like this huge smoker, like big time smoker. And he was back, you know, flown back to the States, where he supposedly said that, you know, where it was supposedly said that Miller's younger brother, Herb Miller, claimed that Glenn Miller died not in a plane crash over the channel, but from lung cancer in the hospital. Well, Miller had apparently been, you know, shuttled off to, like, military hospital upon arriving, where the cancer took his life the very next day. Now, I also kind of heard that from a documentary that I was watching, that his brother went to see, actually did go to New Jersey to that one hospital, because there was somebody named under his same name there. And when he went there and he saw the man, it was not Glenn Miller, but another Miller. And it wasn't his brother at all. So that one I believe, because it's coming out of his own mouth, where there was a man who had the same name as Glenn Miller, first, middle, and last name, you know, and around the same time. So of course the brother's going to fly out there and just find out if this really is his brother or not, and it wasn't him. Now that one I believe, because it came out of his own mouth on a documentary, whereas this other part where people were saying that his brother claimed that yes, it was really him, you know. So these are just some of the, that was like theory 3 of, you know, that he actually died, you know, here. But I mean, come on, if you got shot in England, why would they ship you all the way from England into America to fix your gunshot wound?
Yeah, it's like they don't have hospitals in England.
Doctors?
Or doctors, you know. I mean, every military base, even temporary military bases have medical.
Right. I thought it was,
you know,
but they don't have the, but they did, I guess they didn't have that
then,
special unnamed
doctor. Do you have any
doctor.
idea back then how long it took to fly from England to New York? You know, I mean, that was a long flight. And then, and why would they
By that
send
time, he
him
reached the
to
center of a
Ohio?
lollipop. I don't know. Like, Ohio had the, well, because they had the best bullet-taking doctors there, I guess. Once he could take out the bullet.
There wasn't any other doctor in the whole country that could take a bullet out of him.
Not just our country, but the whole Europe. They had to leave Europe.
Okay, Ohio was the only place in the entire world that could remove a bullet.
That special bullet.
Okay?
I know.
That special bullet. I mean, that was a special bullet that only Ohio could remove.
The unnamed special doctor in Ohio.
Yeah, by the unknown doctor. Wow.
He must have had some amazing skills to do that, because I'm seriously, he would have died before he even made it back from Europe to Ohio. So that's stupid. But he could have had cancer. I mean, it's plausible that he may have had cancer, but is that the thing that killed him? I don't think so. But he may have had cancer while he was over there. That's totally believable, you know.
Scooby said, I'm surprised there aren't any theories about UFOs kidnapping Miller, because they love his music.
I bet you there is, but I didn't, you know, get
there
that far in there.
We just haven't come across it yet, Scooby.
Right. Well, another theory is that, you know, Miller crashed due to bad weather, and supporting this claim is, which this one dude I read on a page said, was Fred W. Atkinson, Jr., who in 1944 had been in the airport at Paris, and he had been a member of the 320th Air Transport Squadron, in which a unit of Colonel Arnold's Air Transport Wing, and served as an experimental air evacuation squadron specializing in removal of wounded soldiers from field hospitals and the transportation of these men back to Paris. Now, according to Atkinson, 2 of the C-64 Norsemen were scheduled to return to Paris on the day Miller departed from London. However, the flights were canceled on account of bad weather. Now, in spite of the risk involved, an unnamed brigadier general, I like how they have unnamed ones.
Oh, wow, another unnamed source.
General ordered that 2 pilots fly Miller into Paris to regroup with his band, who had arrived earlier. When Atkinson's unit left for Paris several days later, they were notified of a crashed aircraft on the coast of France that might belong to the unit, whose occupants were dead. Because the plane crashed. A plane was dispatched, and its crew identified the bodies as those of Glenn Miller and the 2 pilots, based on their identification papers and dog tags, as well as visual identification. Now, the second crew in London further verified that Glenn Miller and the 2 pilots had been seen to depart in the crashed aircraft several days earlier. Papers detailing the salvage of the crashed aircraft were processed, as were the reports of the death of the pilots on the squadron morning report, which was updated on a daily basis to keep track of the status of all personnel. Now, because of the loss of the pilots in the Army's number 1 morale man, there were rumors that officers on the 320th Squadron had sworn to bring manslaughter charges against the brigadier general who had issued the order. However, as Glenn Miller had not yet been officially pronounced dead, they could do little but wait in frustration until the announcement was made. And unfortunately for Atkinson's unit, there was never a conclusion to all this, despite the surplus of witnesses to confirm the events. Now,
wait a minute. What this theory says is that basically they went in and they brought up the plane.
Picked up the plane, picked up the bodies.
Had the bodies.
Right.
Did they lose the bodies? Because the bodies never made it back to the United States.
Right.
So what did they do? Did they just,
they buried them there.
This is what it is. Threw them back in the plane, threw the plane back in the channel. Is that what they did?
No. It supposedly, they also said that they had buried them in a grave there. But this Atkinson's and the 320th Squadron basically all saw the paperwork, and it was, written and recorded, and they had the plane, and they had the bodies, they had their identification, their dog tags, and all that stuff.
Oh, I know. His body's out at Area 51, right?
It could be. I don't know where his body is. That's
I'm
why
sorry.
it's
This theory is just as stupid as the other one. If they had the bodies, if they recovered the wreckage, and they had the bodies, where are the bodies? Did they lose them? Did they misplace them? What did they do with them? And why would they bury them and then tell his wife, well, he's missing. We don't know where he's at.
I don't know. The papers work disappeared, everything disappeared. But how the whole squadron wanted to kick this murder this unknown, general who demanded and ordered for them to leave because one of the pilots on there was their buddy, But they couldn't do anything. They had to wait till it was officially announced because they had to wait until, everybody found out that, hey, Glenn Miller's dead. Then they could go out and do it. None of it makes sense to me. It's one of those, like I said, these are the theories that people are claiming, like, hey, I did this, I was part of this group, and we did this, and we got this. It's like everybody just wants the publication of being famous. They're 15 minutes of fame.
Later on, if I remember right, didn't a diver go down in the 80s looking for that?
Yeah, in 1985, a British diver, Clive Ward, found what seemed to be the remains of a Norseman, C-64, off the coast of France. But aside from, normal corrosive effects from the sea from being down there for so long.
Yeah.
Ward found absolutely no damage to the plane, and there was no sign of the plane's registration, like no markings or no nothing on the plane, and there was also no human remains in that plane either. It's almost like this plane was just dumped in there.
Well, if you stop and think about it, okay, it went down in, 44, and this is 85, so we're talking 41 years. You know, I mean...
But there's still but it's not just stickers or paintings or whatnot. All the items on aircrafts and boats, and well, almost every item on a plane has a distinct number on it, so you can trace that number back to the plane. So if you just found the propeller, that propeller has a number and a code on it, and they'll trace back to the plane that it was put on. So he said that there was no signs of any plane registration or a numbering on this plane, and there was no human remains. It wasn't Glenn Miller's plane, basically.
Right, so it's safe to say that if he did go down in 1985 and he did find the remains of a Norseman, there's nothing to say that that was the plane that Glenn Miller went down on, because there would be something there with a number or something to, like you say, with a code or a number to put that to that plane.
Right.
But he found nothing.
Right. So he couldn't classify, he couldn't say one way or the other if it was or if it wasn't his. And that's what I read at the time. It doesn't mean that this guy hadn't gone and done more with it, but this is all I found on the internet thus far, you know. But there's just so many things of people finding this or saying they did this. But there was another theory, is that Miller's plane was shot down by friendly fire.
Right.
And that seems plausible to me, you know, because...
Well, there have been a lot of... who is that football player from Wisconsin?
I don't know. There's a lot of football people.
He was killed by friendly fire. There have been a lot... There were a lot of incidences in the Vietnam War. Oh, I'm sorry, conflict. That wasn't an official war. Of people dying or places being bombed by friendly fire. So that could be plausible.
Well, that's the friendly fire one is like the most debated theory of the Glenn Miller disappearances stuff, was that his plane had been a victim of friendly fire. Now, according to this guy who came out later, I think in 2000 and something, Fred Shaw, who was a navigator of Lancaster, serial number NF973, claims that on the day Miller's plane disappeared, 138 Lancaster bombers, one of them which was Fred Shaw's, were returning from an aborted bombing raid, and because their fighter escorts had failed, because they couldn't do the bombing, is because the planes that were supposed to escort them, the smaller planes, failed to get off the ground due to bad weather, so they kind of had to turn around and come back. Well, because the squadron could not land with all the bombs, they had to drop their bombs. So they went to the bomb jetting zone, which was known as the South Jetson area, which was a 10-mile circle, you know, which was like 50 miles south over the English Channel. And it was officially called the dangerous grounds, and basically all airplanes and ships avoided that section, because that's where all the planes would go and drop their bombs if they had to abort a mission. Now, when the bombs were dropped, Shaw, who had never seen a bombing before during the day, decided to look out the window and watch them explode. He said as the bombs exploded several feet above the surface of the sea, he saw a plane flying south. Well, years later, he would say, "It was obvious to me that the airplane below was in trouble, so I watched it intently. Then just before it went out of sight under the leading edge of the wing, I saw it flick over to port, and it looked like it went into incepted spin, you know." So he said, and eventually I saw it disappear into the English Channel. Now, the bomber Aimer had reported the same sighting a moment before, and also the rear gunner called over the intercom that there's a kite just gone down under. Well, because they were technically not in enemy territory, and their mission had been, dropped because they couldn't do it, so they didn't get debriefed when they got back. So they didn't have to tell about the plane going down, and there was always planes going down. You know what I mean? They didn't know whose it was or whatever, so they weren't debriefed or anything. So that's why they never mentioned them seeing this little Norsen type plane going down. Well, he said, I lost my spot. Hold on. Fred Shaw said he never connected the down plane with Glenn Miller's mysterious disappearance until 1956 when he saw the movie The Glenn Miller Story. And that's that movie that with what's that guy? Oh, he did that. What? It's a Wonderful Life. Do you remember that guy's name?
Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah, he did. He was.
Oh, and by the way, that NFL player's name was Pat Tillman.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go, people. She figured out the name. So it wasn't until he saw that movie with the Glenn Miller Story that's when he decided to check his old logbook, and he realized that the Norseman he'd seen plunging into the sea could very well have been Glenn Miller's. Now, when Shaw first came out with his story, the public's initial response, especially the Glenn Miller Appreciation Society, was to dismiss him as a publicity seeker since he waited so long to come out with it, you know? So they asked him like a ton of questions. They were like, you know, how could it be proven that Miller's plane had strayed into the path of the Lancasters when John Morgan had even failed to register a flight path?
You know, and another thing too, why didn't he report that plane going down? Okay,
because there was a lot of planes that went down, and they
during
the war
dropping those bombs. I mean, this was a plane that was taking off from his base, and he sees this plane go down, and he doesn't report it. Right.
Well, what they did is the Glenn Miller Appreciation Society had sent somebody out to ask all these questions, and some of the questions were like what you were saying. They also said, well, how was Shaw able to recognize the Norsemen when there were only half a dozen of these Canadian planes in Britain in the first place? Or, you know, what about the 1 hour, time difference? You know, so the British Defense Ministry Air Historical Branch decided to investigate these claims, and they recruited Roy Nisbet, an aviation historian, and now an RAF editor at the Public Record Office, who spent years researching the problem. And his findings revealed, okay, how could Miller's plane have strayed into the Jetson zone? And his thing was that the Norsen had no option but to take that, shuttle path, that route to France, despite all the anti-aircraft emplacements on the southeast coast, a route that had been cleared for flights. Unfortunately, this brought Miller's plane dangerously close to the bombing area, which was only a few miles away from the SHAEF path, because John Morgan was an inexperienced in flying by instruments. He only flew by sight. He didn't have experience with flying but with the instruments.
Right.
So they're saying that he most likely probably used a compass, and that's how he could have got off and went into that path, and got slightly off path, That was one of the theories or whatever else. And then they said, why was there an hour discrepancy in the flight time? Well, this guy said the official report was that the bomb group had dropped their bombs at 1:40 p.m. or 1:40 p.m. on December 15th, and Morgan's flight log put the plane 1 hour ahead of the bomb group, thereby raising questions as to the validity of the claim. However, by comparing logs written in the air with operations in the ground, Nesbitt was able to determine that the Americans had used local time, which was an hour ahead of, Greenwich Mean Time, thereby explaining the time issue. You know what I mean?
Right.
Which doesn't make sense to me. But it also said, well, how could Shaw have recognized, the Norseman plane? Well, Fred Shaw, I guess, had training in Canada, and they used Norseman airplanes over there. So that's what this guy's theory was. Like, okay, it works over here because he had, training in Canada. So, I don't know. It's like this guy was kind of guessing and like putting stuff in. He was trying to prove that Fred Shaw's was right, and working with his theories or whatever. But they also had another guy that had mentioned, too, that he had, what was his name here? Some other dude had mentioned, his name's like Greg or whatever. He said, but back then, when they aborted, bombings and stuff, and they normally nobody was ever debriefed if the mission was called off. So there was tons of planes going down. He said all the time it was war, and don't call me, he's not like he was being callous or whatever, but he was like, that's just the thing, there's just too much stuff going on that, they weren't going to worry about some random plane going down when there's tons of planes going down. It was war.
Yeah, but the thing of it is this, okay? This was a corridor, a flight corridor that was deemed safe. There were no planes going down in this corridor. Why did he not report, or anybody else report, planes going down in this so-called safe fly zone?
That wasn't actually the safe fly zone. He actually they're saying that this Norseman missed the safe fly zone and ended up being in the Jetson, where they dropped all the bombs.
The jettison zone.
Yeah.
Right.
So where he wasn't supposed to be there, and that by the time that, Morgan left and these guys were heading out, they were going to cross the pass exactly at the same time and got bombed. But there's, the Appreciation Society dismissed the story because they believed that no plane could have possibly flown that day because of the bad weather. And, Alan Ross took it seriously and independently investigated the matter himself, and he wrote into the airmail of the RAF Association Journal, and that's when other people started sending in stuff and saying, planes went down all the time. We're not trying to be, callous or jerks, but, they had other things on their mind. People were always dying. It's war, one guy said, and he had mentioned that he too saw a Norseman flying over in that area as well. But they also did a separate investigation carried out by the EA Mundane of the Air Historical Branch at the Ministry of Defense, and it revealed records confirming that a squadron had taken off at noon on the 15th of December of 1944, and they attacked the railway yards at Saigon, or not Saigon, I'm totally somewhere else, but anyway, in Germany. Siegen, yeah. And the records further confirmed that the force had to be recalled before they even entered German control airspace, and that the planes were ordered to, get rid of their bombs before they landed. There was also a logbook that by Derek Thurman, the flight engineer on board the Shaw's Lancaster, surfaced in the year 2000, because I guess it ended up being at one of those, antique roadshows. And Thurman had written that when the bombs were away, 3 crew members on board the plane had spotted a light aircraft below, which seemed to have been downed by the hail of explosions. Now, the bomb aimer saw it first from the nose and commented on it, whereupon the navigator shot out from his seat to, check out the window to have a look, and he saw the plane whip by, and second later the rear gunner called to say, hey, it's gone in, flipped over, and it's gone. Now, there's arguments and testimonies that go against Nibbitt's report, by some other guys that are investigating it too, and they're saying that everything that Fred Shaw said and the timings that he came up with in his logbooks, they researched it and stuff and said that there was 2 different handwritings in it. Why did he, wait, till 2000 something to come out about it? It's almost like he just wanted to get famous, so
right.
There's just this huge, because he was on PBS, and he was also on a History Channel, and he had discrepancies with the things that he said on those 2 different shows. So they're saying, hey, what you said on here is not matching up. The timing and the mapping of how he discovered it and planned it out, they said that's how he even came up with those numbers or whatever. They're saying there's no way. So, I mean, this is like a huge, massive debate of, between Fred Shaw.
I don't think anybody's ever going to really know what happened.
Right. I mean, there's like I said, there's history. It's like History Detectives or whatever. They'd done this huge bit on the Glenn Miller disappearance, and they put like a lot of work into it, and had a lot of people come on, and it's a really good thing. You guys can go to like the PBS network channel on Google or whatever, and you can find it and watch it on the internet for free, because that's where I saw it, on the PBS website. And then there's like a couple other ones on YouTube you guys can go check out. But I mean, basically, the official report was issued by the U.S. military on this, December 24th, that Miller's plane had nosedived into the English Channel, either because its wings had iced over or due to engine failure. Because those planes had a recall on an engine part, it was like some heating element that would keep the ice and everything melted and whatever the heck all that stuff is. But it was all those planes all had that same failing part, and it was recorded and reported on almost every single plane. So they're saying that this plane basically had iced over due to engine failure, and the fact that Glenn Miller and his death is more than likely attributed to like a series of just unfortunate accidents. Yeah.
I think the defective excuse me. I think the defective part was the carburetor, if I remember right. And they used this same carburetor on other planes. It wasn't just this Norseman, it was used on other planes, and it caused other planes to go down.
Right. And caused a lot of icing over in the engine and over the wings and stuff. But they're basically saying that it was just Glenn Miller just had just an unfortunate accident due to weather, inexperienced pilot, and faulty plane parts. Now, however, me, you, and everybody else may never really know what really truly happened in the final minutes of those guys' life. It's all we know is that he and the other men had boarded that plane on December 15th, and Don Haynes watched them fly off, and that's the last of anybody ever saw them. And the plane's never been found, and their bodies have never been recovered. And all I know is that from what I was reading is that Glenn Miller really loved life. He loved his country. He was a true patriot, and he gave up an amazing, high-paying job, here in the States, to leave and to serve his country.
He gave up fame.
What'd you say, $15,000, $20,000 a week?
$15,000 to $20,000 a week, and at that time that was nothing to. At that time, $3,000-$4,000 a week was nothing to sneeze at.
Right. So, if anything, I think the best thing that I got out of this is that Glenn Miller was an amazing man. He loved music. He loved bringing happiness and joy to people, and he was a true patriot, and he loved his country, and he went over to, do his service that he could to help the morale of the men fighting. And him and these two men had, whatever happened to them, I don't think anybody's ever going to truly find out, But I personally think it was that they flew over and they ended up having, I think that their engine just had issues and it went down. So I'm thinking it's either.
I mean, we're talking December, which is winter.
Bad weather.
We're talking about bad weather.
Right.
And fog in the wintertime will ice up. If you've ever driven through fog in the wintertime, it ices up your car, your antenna, your windshield, all of that good stuff. So it just seems plausible to me that it was bad judgment taken off when they did, in the weather that they did, and that the plane iced up and went down.
Well, if it was as foggy as it was, and he's inexperienced and he can't read the gauges
the instruments,
because he's not
instrument rated.
So he would keep flying lower and lower to stay out of the clouds because he would be lost in the clouds. Well, that lower and lower, and the temperature gets lower when he's going down. I think it was an inexperienced flyer, faulty parts in the plane, and it was winter and bad weather, and you add all that together, and it makes for a big mess.
That plane wreck.
Right. But because the guy Morgan didn't have a set flight path, nobody actually knows what path he took. They're only guesstimating. So I think that's why nobody's really found the wreckage of it, But maybe that man in 1985 who did find that Norseman C-64 in the English Channel, that very well could have been their plane, So
hard to say.
That is our bit. Let's just want to take a quick break before you go and talk about the rest of the.
Yes, I do.
All right, we're going to take a quick break for those of you who are listening over at the Ustream site or on Facebook watching. If you want, you can pop over and join and chat with the people who are here, and we'll be back in 3 minutes. Welcome back to Anything But Ordinary. I'm your host, Raven, and here's your other amazing, awesome, kick-ass host, Spooky.
Kick-ass, that's right.
What about awesome and amazing? You don't like that?
I like awesome and amazing, but I really like kick-ass. Welcome back, everybody. I lost my train of thought. How about that?
Well, welcome back to our second half of our show for Unsolved Disappearances. Yep.
Theodosia Burr Alston.
Right.
Right. This woman was born June 21st, 1783. She was the only child of U.S. Vice President Aaron Burr. And for those of you that don't know your history, he was the third vice president under Thomas Jefferson, and Theodosia Bartow Provost. She was born in Albany, New York, but was raised mostly in New York City. Her education was closely supervised by her father, but she was given an education that most women of her time were not given. Back then, you know, even especially wealthy women, you didn't need an education. All you needed was just to know how to get along with others. So, in addition to the more conventional subjects such as French, music, and dancing, big whoop, she studied arithmetic, Latin, Greek, English composition, and was allowed to study politics.
I think dancing was important back then to people of high society.
I can understand the French because back then wealthy women kind of followed the French fashions, which weren't too different from ours back then, but I don't know. French music and dancing, that would bore me to death.
Well, I know her dad totally wanted her to have as much education as the boys, so he basically had her learn everything.
And like I said, this woman was given an education that most women of her day just simply did not get. She would write letters to her father, and he would promptly return them and include detailed criticism whenever she got anything wrong in them. You know, like if she stated something wrong or misspelled anything, he wanted her to be perfect.
Right.
And he also stressed mental discipline.
Yeah.
Her mother died when she was 10, and so her father began to really closely supervise her social education. It wasn't enough for the book learning and stuff. It was also very, very important back then to be able to socialize in certain circles, and specifically like the arts and the intricacies of relating to people. After all, he was a politician.
Well, he was vice president.
Yeah, he was vice president. You know, I mean...
You don't want no stupid kid, you know?
And in politics, you had to know how to relate to people to become reelected. Politics was completely different back then. Politicians actually worked for the people.
But he wasn't like some douchebag. I mean, he loved his daughter. I mean, they were like best friends.
He adored his daughter. By the age of 14, she began to serve as hostess at their home, Richmond Hill, in what is now Greenwich Village.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, he adored his daughter. His daughter was his confidant and his best friend.
Right. I mean, he went to her for even love advice because he had a lot of relationship issues because, you know, he was dating many women.
Yeah, she was 14 years old, and she's hosting these big, huge balls that included the most esteemed leaders of the world, not just in the United States, but you know, and authors and musicians and political leaders of countries,
native chiefs, you know,
kings,
Native American chiefs, and a lot of stuff.
Chiefs,
mm-hmm.
at the age of 14, and some of these so-called galas, her father didn't even attend. He would be called away on business, and here she was, his 14-year-old, but everybody adored her. And even at the age of 14, they would fight to get on her guest list. Anytime she was having, well, we call them parties now, but back then they were referred to as balls. So...
Right, I was laughing at somebody typed.
That's not funny, Penny.
Anyway.
So anyway, you know, I mean, people would fight to get on her guest list at the age of 14.
Well, right.
So
well, she was a beautiful, attractive woman.
She was educated,
and extremely smart,
and her dad was a powerful man.
Right. Well, that's
Even
a big part of
it. Even though he
it.
went through 2 scandals, one of the scandals was he had a duel with Alexander Hamilton and shot Alexander Hamilton, and he was also arrested and tried for treason. But
and that's when he left. Didn't he flee, or
he was acquitted of that charge, but he went into self-exile. He left and went to Europe.
Yeah,
like
but he left her behind.
But by that time, she was married. On February 2nd, 1801, she married Joseph Alston. He was a wealthy landowner. Excuse me. He was a wealthy landowner from South Carolina. His family owned a huge rice plantation, which he later inherited.
Right, they were a really rich family,
and
too.
Also, at one time, he also became governor of South Carolina.
Right, so she was well-to-do all the way around, from her dad and all
she married well. And in the social circles in South Carolina, it was the same thing. She was well-known, she was well-liked, and people fought to get on her guest list. Her father approved of the marriage basically because at the time his finances were in a mess and he was almost financially ruined. So he didn't even know if he would be able to hold on to his mansion, Richmond Hill, and he believed that her marriage to Alston would relieve him of some of his financial burdens. And it also meant that she would become prominent in South Carolina social circles. This is the kind of life he wanted for his daughter. He wanted, excuse me, he wanted his daughter to be well-liked. He wanted his daughter to be prominent in political circles. And for a woman at that time, your husband could gain a lot of political power and allies through his wife. I mean, if she was the type of social woman that everybody flocked to, well, it didn't hurt the husband's political career one bit, even though she was not allowed to vote.
Yeah.
But women didn't have a lot of rights back then, but certain women back then had a lot of power.
She had a lot of pull with her dad because, like I said, they were best friends. He confided in her with a lot of stuff, and she had dealings with, like you said, very well-to-do people, and, you know, they were like, you know, best friends. I mean, he came to her for love advice and everything else. And
the fact that her father was a vice president of the United States or an ex-vice president of the United States didn't hurt either.
Right.
The couple had a son who was born in 1802, and they named him Aaron Burr Alston. This is how much she thought of her father, because she adored him as much as he adored her. She even named her son after him. And after the birth of her son, though, her health became very frail, so she made trips to Saratoga, New York, and Ballston Spa in an effort to regain her health. In the spring of 1807, that's when her father was arrested for treason, and during his trial, she was there with him providing comfort and support. She was there every single day.
Mm-hmm.
When he was acquitted, he went into self-imposed exile for 4 years, and during this 4 years, she acted as his agent, raising money for him and sending it to him and transmitting messages. I mean, he knew what was going on because she was out there finding out and telling him.
Right.
She wrote letters to then Secretary of State Albert Gallatin and to Dolly Madison, who at the time was the First Lady, to secure a smooth return for her dad. I don't know why he was in self-imposed exile. Why didn't he just come home? You know,
because, you know, just because he was acquitted or whatever you just said of his treason acts or whatever, there's still people in the country that...
He still had his loyal friends.
But he also had haters. You know? So
yeah.
He probably fled thinking... fear for his life, let things cool down a while, and then he'd come back, you know?
Right. Well, that's possible, but still, you know, I mean, it was self-imposed exile, just come home.
But if there was a lot of haters for wanting to get rid of him, I could see why he fled.
Well, even though he was kind of a popular vice president, you know, I mean, I don't care how popular you are,
yeah.
You're going to have haters.
Everybody has haters.
Look at me, people love me, but people hate me.
I'm on her hate.
Now I lost my train of thought. Oh, yeah. He did return to New York in July of 1812.
Mm-hmm.
But Theodosia, or Theo as she was called, even her father called her Theo, she couldn't join him right away because her son came down with malaria. And he died on June 30th, and her grief almost killed her. She grieved for her son for a long time. And so she waited until December to join him.
Well, because she was depressed. And she was
very depressed.
Did not want to leave.
And not only that, the War of 1812, which was a war between the United States and Great Britain, broke out in June, and her husband Joseph was sworn in as governor of South Carolina on December 10th. So he was governor of South Carolina during the War of 1812, and as head of the state militia, he couldn't accompany her on her trip north. So her father sent Timothy Green to accompany her. He was an old friend of the family and also had some medical knowledge because like I said, her health wasn't that great at the time.
No, she was not doing good at all. And he wanted her to come back, you know?
Well, her husband and her were waiting at Georgetown, South Carolina, for the ship to come in that was going to take her north.
Mm-hmm.
And this was December, it was winter, and there was a storm coming in. And finally, the schooner Patriot, came in, and she boarded it.
You know what I heard? I heard about that ship had already been out and about and had a bunch of booty, and they basically painted...
Oh, yeah. I'm going to get to that.
Oh, okay, go ahead. Sorry about that.
But, okay, the Patriot was a famously fast
schooner?
Sailor.
Oh, sailor, yeah.
Okay, it had originally been built as a pilot boat. A pilot boat, for those of you that don't know, that's a type of boat used to transport pilots between land and the inbound or outbound ships that they're piloting. The pilots are the ones that actually drive or sail the boats, not the captains. It also served as a privateer during the War of 1812. And what a privateer is a person or a ship that is authorized by a government to attack foreign vessels during wartime. So, Raven is right. The Patriot was out looting ships.
Right, and they had a bunch of...
Well, her name was painted out,
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't know what ship it was. And any indication of her recent activities, and they always refer to ships as her, don't ask me why, I don't know. But every indication of her recent activities were erased. They didn't want anybody to know
that she had held
what this schooner was.
Well, but that's why, because the boat was loaded down with all the, stuff they had theft. And I'm going to say it again, booty, because that's what they called it back then. You know what I mean? They had all the gold and gosh knows what else they stole that's on there. So they got all this stuff. So that's it. I'm sure somebody would have recognized the pirates or whatnot. I'm sure probably still recognized the boat, even though they took out the guns and put them away and painted her,
Right. Exactly. But the thing of it was, though, it didn't have to have the name on the ship.
You still recognize the boat.
Any seasoned pirate would recognize the ship before it saw the name.
Right. Totally.
The captain of the Patriot.
Sorry. Scooby said it's also called Loot. Thank you, Scooby.
Thank you. Her captain was William Overstocks, and he wanted to make a fast run to New York with his booty, loot, cargo, whatever. Because it was likely that the Patriot was loaded down with captured cargo from recent raids. This ship had been out pulling raids, and the cargo was shipped elsewhere. Why, I don't know. What the heck. Anyway, all kinds of rumors surfaced immediately on being,
Lost your spot?
I lost my train of thought. Anyway, okay, the Patriot and all on board were never heard from again.
Right.
Once this ship set sail, that was the last anybody had seen of.
I think somebody had seen them at some certain area, and then after that, they had...
Well, they did encounter a British ship.
Yeah, they made contact with them, and then they said after that, nobody knew what happened for sure.
Nobody knew what happened, and there
after
were all kinds
that.
Right, and there were all kinds of rumors that surfaced immediately, saying the Patriot was captured by the pirate Dominic Yu, who was known as the Bloody Babe.
Right.
And he was a pirate that actually worked up and down the southern sea coast. Or something happened near Cape Hatteras, which was notorious for wreckers.
Well, they said one of them was... Oh, go ahead, finish that part. Sorry.
Wreckers were people who would take all of the valuables from a shipwreck, and often, though, they would cause the shipwrecks to get to the valuables.
Weren't they called bankers, too? Because they would hang out on the banks?
There was, I'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
Her father refused to give any credit to the rumors, though, because he always believed that she died in a shipwreck until his death. But the rumors persisted, and around 1850, more credible explanations of the mystery surfaced that came from the deathbeds of sailors or executed criminals. But one of the more plausible stories to surface was that the Patriot had fallen prey to the wreckers known as the Carolina Bankers. These were wreckers, people that populated the Sandbank Islands around Nags Head, North Carolina. They were pirating ships, and they were notorious for murdering passengers and crew. When the sea didn't serve up shipwrecks what to plunder, they would lure ships onto the shoals. And one thing that they would do is, like on stormy nights, they would hobble a horse and tie a lantern around
Hobble a horse? You mean like...
Okay, what that is they would basically tie...
Like a rope around one of the legs or something?
Rope around the front legs.
Right. One of them.
And the horse could walk, but it couldn't run. but when it walked, it had to kind of hop.
Right, like
Okay?
one leg was tied up.
Yeah, it was used to keep the horses from running away. And what they would do is they would hobble a horse and they'd tie a lantern around the animal's neck, and then they'd walk it up and down the beach. Well, of course, the horse had to hop a little bit. So any ships out there, the sailors would think that the bobbing light was a ship securely anchored, and they would head toward the shore looking for shelter, but instead they would wreck on the banks.
Right.
And the passengers and crew would be murdered and the ship looted. In 1910, a Mr. J.A. Elliott of Norfolk, Virginia, stated that in 1812 the body of a young woman with every indication of refinement washed up on the shore at Cape Charles and had been buried on her finder's farm. Now, every indication of refinement could have meant the clothes that she was wearing, or maybe the jewelry she had on. I mean, you just knew rich women when you saw them back then.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, you know, I mean, because they just had a way about... Nowadays, you know, it's kind of hard to tell, really, but unless you get into the ones that are really proud of their wealth.
There's people who think they're rich and they'll dress rich, but they're poor as a pauper, but they're using credit cards. But back then, people wore certain stuff. So, yeah, no, I understand what you're saying.
Well, that's true. And, there were just so many theories also on her death.
Well, I don't know.
You know, that she had been,
well, one of the ones I had saw is, like, one of the more famous pirate stories was on the deathbed confession of, like you said, the old Frank dude or whatever.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And Burdick, an associate.
Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
It's okay, but he was associated to the pirates.
2 days after they left from Georgetown with an impending storm forming, and 2 days after the departure, a storm did hit around Cape Hatteras.
Mm-hmm.
And it was speculated the Patriot was caught up in this storm. 15 years later, an old pirate named Old Frank Burdick,
mm-hmm.
he confessed from his deathbed that he held the plank as a pretty woman in a white dress walked it and plunged to her death, but all the time she kept begging them that someone notify her husband and her father.
Right. Well, he claimed that he and his crew had sacked the Patriot, and killed everyone on board.
Exactly. Then they abandoned it under full sail.
But that even the savage pirates were reluctant to kill her because she was so beautiful, you know, and complimented Theodosia. So basically, they claimed that instead of, you know, killing her, they made her walk the plank, and
what's the difference? She drowned.
Well, I know, but they didn't want to stab her or shoot her gory like they did the rest of them.
They didn't want to cut her up.
But he claimed that she was wearing that long white dress, like you said, and he said that she descended gracefully into the sea, her hands crossed in prayer. Now, he also said that there was a portrait of Theodosia
in the cabin.
Yeah, in the captain's cabin.
And that portrait surfaced years later. What had happened was one of the pirates or one of the wreckers looted that, and somewhere along the way, someone in his family tried to sell it because they needed the money. And it was a portrait of Theodosia Burr Alston.
Right. Well, they said it was allegedly given to Dr. William Poole in the 1870s by a wrecker. Right. And they claim to have found it on the shores of Kitty Hawk in North Carolina in the early 1800s. And Poole tried for years to identify the portrait subject as Theodosia, but, you know, couldn't really. I mean, the woman in the portrait, you know, resembles Aaron Burr's daughter, but nobody can really ever prove that it is her.
And the thing of it is, as wealthy and as refined as this woman was,
right,
there weren't that many portraits of her.
Nope. Well, there may have been, but they went down.
Well, there may have been, but nobody had really seen them, you know. And like I said, Burdick also said that they plundered the ship and then they abandoned it under full sail. So what they did was they just let this ship just sail off. This ship could have ended up anywhere. It could have crossed the Atlantic. It could have gone down to Florida and wrecked. I mean, you know, there is no way under full sail during a high wind storm that this ship's going to stay in the same place.
Right. No, I'm in agreement with you, you know, but I mean, there's so many pirates that were trying to take fame for saying, oh, you know, we did this, because they wanted to go down in history being, you know, for, you know. Back
then, the wreckers and the pirates, which were basically the same thing.
And the bankers.
And, well, the bankers, it's not the bankers, you know, the building with money. They were called bankers because they lived along the banks of the sea.
Well, to wreck and loot people.
Loot people, and they would even cause ships to wreck so they could get to their cargo and their valuables. And they were notorious. The Carolina bankers were notorious for killing crew and passengers.
But when you were reading that part, you had to have in your brain, like, well, what a fitting name for them. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
bankers. Because,
really,
I mean, like Spooky said, it's nice to know that bankers are still notorious to this day. I mean, if you think about it.
Really.
Bankers kind of scam people, too, so.
But when people think of pirates and wreckers, they don't think of the United States.
Right. Well,
they think that that's, you know, those are people over in the Caribbean and foreign places. They don't stop to think that back during then, pirates were very well established along
the banks of the river,
southern sea coast.
Also the river. I mean, there was pirates on the Mississippi rivers. You know.
Well, that's true, because I got a famous land pirate in my family.
Which will be another show. It's not for
we already had a show on him.
Oh, that's right. Well, you can go back and listen to the podcast. It was a good one. But
John A. Merle. That's the podcast. But yeah, there were pirates all over. There were pirates along the Mississippi. There were pirates along a lot of rivers. There were pirates along. There weren't so many pirates along the northern Atlantic seacoast. But there were a lot of them along the southern seacoast.
Well, they say one of the legends that holds for that Theodosia was captured by the pirates who took the Patriot and imprisoned on board for several years. And then they say the legend says that eventually the ship was destroyed in a storm in the Gulf of Mexico, and the severed mast kind of washed ashore. Well, Theodosia was chained naked to it, and they say this local Indian chief happened upon her, and she told him she was the daughter of a great white chief who had been exiled from his people, and she gave him the locket around her neck, and inscribed on that necklace was the name Theodosia, and he, you know, and
then why wouldn't he tell somebody?
Well, wait, I didn't finish telling the story yet. And then he, you know, he basically said that he would tell her tale to any white or English-speaking man he met, and she died in his arms. Now the chief buried her on that beach and wore her necklace forever after, and every white person or every English-speaking person, he told the story of Theodosia being chained up naked on this, you know, broken mast that came up to shore, and in her dying words was saying, you know, because he didn't know who her dad was, you know, so he was just roaming around telling everybody that he supposedly met, hey, this is what happened to her.
Back then,
that was a legend, though, a theory.
Yeah, it's a legend. I don't believe it, because it seems to me that somewhere along the way, word would have gotten back, or somebody would have tried their best to get word back. But back then, Native Americans, they didn't understand a president, and, you know, until they started taking their land and putting them on reservations, that's when they became familiar with United States government.
Right.
For all, you know, I mean, to them, it was just a white man, a foreigner to them, that was trying to kill them. But this ship, you would think, unless it sank in the middle of the Atlantic, you'd think this ship, since it was under full sail, would have wrecked somewhere.
Well,
But,
you know how there's so many boats
or
that
there would have been sightings of it, you know. I mean, because like I said, there were a lot of pirates around then.
Well, right, but that's what I really do think, that either when they left and had that last contact with that British ship, that they headed into that storm, and they could have, wrecked because of the storm, or more than likely they were attacked by pirates. And
Yeah.
one of these pirate stories that were out there does hold truth to what happened to them,
Well, and you got to think too, why in the world would she take a ship knowing there were pirates out there and the war was going on? That was
She was
because
sick,
back,
too.
and she was sick. Well, that was their transportation back then. We're talking about a time before the railroad, before stagecoaches. So the only real transportation they had back then were on ships.
Well, right, and that was one of the faster of them all, and she just wanted to get back.
It was considered at its time, to be one of the fastest ships out there. But it was actually a schooner. It wasn't a real big ship. It was
No.
a schooner.
It's like a speed. Back in that day, that'd be considered the speedboats,
Right.
of the time. But that
But
was,
it was loaded down with cargo, so how fast could it be?
faster than the bigger ones, that's for sure. But the point is I would have never gotten on that ship, knowing its reputation, knowing that it was a very sad
And that
out
was something else
boat.
too. Her husband had to have known what this ship was used for, and that people would be on the lookout for this ship. There had to have been a
Maybe,
bounty,
but maybe she never died on that ship.
contract,
Maybe
so to speak, out on this ship.
maybe that ship never shipwrecked. Maybe that ship never got attacked by pirates. Maybe they took off and sailed off to somewhere and with all the loot themselves and enjoyed the high life somewhere else.
Well, what did they do with her?
No, she went with them. The whole boat, her, and they just all agreed, hey, let's just take this, screw everybody else, we'll keep this for ourselves, and they all just took off. I mean, I'm just making up
And
my own new
basically,
theory.
for her time, this was a very famous woman.
But she also had her dealings with the pirates and, a lot of people. So there's a lot of things that they're talking about with her and her dealings with all these different people, So I don't really know. They could have kidnapped her and held her for ransom knowing that who she was. And it could have been a failed ransom and it didn't work out, She could have died during, them being held captive because she was extremely sick too. But
That's true too.
I like Spooky's thing. She basically said the moral of the story of tonight's two story topics is don't travel in.
Scooby, not Spooky.
Scooby. I'm so sorry. Scooby 12 said tonight. Moral of tonight's show was don't travel in December when storms are coming, which is basically true because Glenn Miller in December disappeared during a storm, and Theodosia disappeared.
And also she said something else too, which is true. The Outer Banks of North Carolina were pretty famous for pirates.
Yeah, they were. Maybe we should do a show about pirate stuff. There's tons of famous stories about pirates. Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of famous ones out there. Bluebeard. I had never heard of the Bloody Babe until I was researching Theo Burr Alston.
Mm-hmm.
And it never really said what became of her husband, whether he remarried or what happened to him. He was governor of South Carolina during the War of 1812, and my understanding is a lot of the fighting during that war was done along the southern states, in the southern states. But whatever her fate was, her uneasy spirit apparently still walks the places where she was both the happiest and the saddest. There have been numerous sightings of her ghost. She's been seen pacing in the warehouse in Georgetown Harbor where she departed on her ill-fated trip.
Oh, so like she went back to her last known place.
Right.
Looking
that was
for...
where she said goodbye to her husband. That was the last time that they saw each other.
Mm-hmm.
And he was there when she departed. She's been seen walking slowly on the property at the Alston summer home which was known as the castle at de Bordeaux Beach, her head bent in sorrow. Well, that's where her son died.
Oh, yeah.
So I could see, her haunting that place.
Well, they also say that she's strolling up and down that one beach, in a dress,
Yeah.
What was that beach? I forgot what you said. You named it earlier, but I can't remember now what you said. But
de Bordeaux Beach.
Maybe that's it. But there's a lot of people that have written really amazing stuff about her, and it's more in depth of what we said, and there's, I can't remember the site, but just look up Theodosia disappearance, and there's some really good stuff out there that's far more detailed.
She has an interesting
history of her whole life too, yeah. And they even have her letters on the internet too. I mean, we weren't going to read them.
That she wrote to her father.
Right.
Some have even said that on foggy nights she's been seen floating above the waves at Huntington Beach. Huntington Beach used to be called Theaville in her honor.
Wow.
And also her spirit has been seen walking the paths at the Oaks, which is the name of her husband's rice plantation, where they spent most of their time, actually. But
so she's just kind of getting all around.
Yeah, her ghost is getting around. Her spirit's getting around. And these are just a few of the hauntings. So not only did this woman have an interesting history and an interesting life, there are also reported sightings of her spirit.
Well, I mean, she was a beautiful woman. She was highly intelligent. She had amazing social skills where she was, hosting amazing gatherings with well-to-do people, like you said, when her dad wasn't even around, Yeah. So, who knows how far she could have went if she.
And when her father was caught up in 2 scandals, I mean, she was right there by his side. And at 14, she became the hostess of the manor, and threw these huge balls that involved heads of state, kings,
all that stuff,
government leaders of foreign countries.
Right.
People fought to get on her guest list, and this was at the age of 14.
Right. But I can only imagine, how far she would have gone if she actually lived. Just
exactly.
If she would have survived.
I have no doubt that if she had lived, her husband would have been one of our presidents. One of our past presidents. Because he also had big political
and having
ambitions.
having her back him with the
Absolutely. He had political ambitions, and there's no telling how far he could have gone with her by his side, because this woman knew the in and outs of politics. She was schooled in it. She was trained in it. Even though she couldn't vote, she knew the in and outs of politics. So she would have been a big asset to him.
Right. And I think that, I just think that they would have, it almost makes you wonder, certain things happen for certain reasons. Maybe they knew that she was going to be on that boat, and had to.
But I can't understand why they would have put her on that particular boat unless she wanted to get to her father so bad that she was willing to take any ship leaving port that was headed that way.
Right. I don't know. I thought it was an interesting story, and there's so much more out there than what we've even covered with both of our topics tonight, because there's just too much to get all the way in. So we were kind of rushing through it or whatever. But I honestly think that they probably ran into some type of pirate situation. That's what I really think.
That's my thought. I believe that she did drown. I believe that they did run into pirates. I think that that they killed her or made her walk the plank.
Right.
It just there's just so much there that you can think of, but I think that's what happened. I think that they were either caught in that storm and the ship went down, which is very plausible, or they were boarded by pirates and everyone killed. I think either one of those are a very plausible explanation.
Right. It is kind of weird that both the topics we picked tonight, they disappeared
in storms.
In winter weather, too, though.
Yeah, so remember, don't try to go on a trip in December in bad weather.
Right. On a boat or in a plane?
On a boat or in a plane.
Maybe a car. I don't know. That might...
Maybe a car. Not sure about a train.
Or in a box.
Although there was a rash there a few years ago where trains were derailing.
Well, that's because you had so much snow, and if you don't have something come by and clear it off, you know, there they go. Who knows?
There you go.
Well,
but I mean, if you stop and think, though, nowadays, well, the 1800s, you had all kinds of transportation then. You had stagecoaches. Okay, wasn't the most comfortable, but it was a form of transportation.
Right.
People went in covered wagons.
Mm-hmm.
The railroad.
Right.
You had the railroad. Not many people really traveled by ship at that time unless they were cargo ships or ships going across the ocean. To a lot of ship traffic was going to over to England. But back then it took a month to get from like New York City to England on a ship.
Right.
So by the time you got there, you didn't want to come home.
Yeah. It's too long. Well, do you want to tell people what we're going to do next week?
Okay. We're going to sign off just a little bit early tonight.
Right.
So I want to thank everybody that came. I want to thank our mods for doing a good job. Thank you, Raven, for a good show tonight. Join us next week when our topic will be vile vortexes around the world where strange disappearances and other strange things have happened. The Alaskan Triangle, the Devil's Sea near Japan, and more. I want to thank you for coming, and don't forget to share us on Facebook or any other social media you happen to be on.
Right, or we also have that new Facebook page too, remember? Anything But Ordinary with Spooky and Raven, and you can like us on there, and you can also watch our shows on that page on a Ustream.
We have a
section.
YouTube channel.
Yep. Where you can watch all our podcasts from. And also we have all our podcasts on our website as well. And you can subscribe on the Ustream to get weekly updates, or you can subscribe on our Ustream site and you can get weekly updates of what the show is going to be. So I just want to say thank you, Spooky, for a good show and an amazing topic that you're reading about. And thank everybody for coming in to chat and our mods, and we'll see you next week. Right, Spooky?
That's right. Good night, everybody, and thank you for listening.
Good night.